Welcome to your last video on 1984. Today we're going to talk about the multiple endings. Yes, there are multiple endings to 1984. These endings aren't necessarily intuitive, or most people probably do not see all these different versions of endings on their first read of 1984. And so this video is here to help you see all those endings and to understand why Orwell would bury all these endings within the novel. So without further ado, let's get started. Um, Before we talk about the ending, I just want to do a quick reminder. I don't believe we did a thorough enough job on the Emmanuel Goldstein book. The Emmanuel Goldstein book, I think, is maybe the most critical part of the novel. Usually, we read the whole thing in class when we're not doing distance learning, and we dissect it 2 pages at a time. We just really didn't have the capacity to do that over distance learning when we had the senior research paper, and so I think really to understand this book and to get the most out of it, you do need to read maybe a couple times these pages from the Emmanuel Goldstein book. He really goes in depth on the military-industrial complex, something that we introduced last week in last week's lectures. He also talks about how class systems serve to oppress people, how the high class, middle class, and lower class are structured in society purposely so that the middle and lower class will pit against each other and ignore the upper class. He talks about how that works in society, and he talks about how doublethink works. These are crucial elements, and the book shifts from a narrative to a book within a book, which reads like a political science book. It's a little bit more dense, maybe, than the rest of 1984, but I think it's important to read through slowly, not to skim it. It is an interesting choice that Orwell made to switch out of this narrative and to go into just complete political science text. But I think he felt like he didn't have an option. He couldn't express his ideas through narrative anymore, so he had to dive into this book, and he tries to get everything out in just a few pages. And so this is a nice summary of what Orwell believes are the gravest dangers to society, and I think it's even more applicable today than ever. So please keep that in mind when you guys read or reread the Emmanuel Goldstein book. Okay, moving on. How can a book have multiple endings, and what tone does 1984 with? So depending on which ending you took away from the novel, would affect the tone you're leaving the book with. And so I'll talk about the I'm going to number 3 different endings and what tone each ending has. And maybe they outline 3 different possibilities for the future of civilization or society. Before we get to that, we need to build up to the end. So, at the end of the novel, Winston Smith is in the Ministry of Love, and he's being tortured. We get some solid musings on the power of torture. Torture isn't used to find information, at least in Orwell's eyes. He thinks torture is there to demonstrate power. It is a tool that governments and systems use to demonstrate their power over other people. They already know Winston's going to die, right? He knows he's going to die, so why are they going to torture him? They already know the truth, so what's the point of torturing Winston? They want to prove that they have power over him. They also want to break Winston. They don't want him to just say 2 plus 2 equals 5. They want him to fully believe it. So they want him to lose his grasp on reality. They don't want to create martyrs. They realized during other revolutions, when revolutionaries were killed, they died heroes. And if you kill someone and make them a hero, then 100 more people sprout up. And so the goal of Big Brother is to never create a martyr, never to create a hero. And their final goal is they don't want him to be in love with Julia. Being in love is a act of rebellion, and they want him to fully renounce who Julia is. And this picture is a version of Winston's torture. Okay, so does it work? Did Winston actually break? Yeah. At the end of the novel, he's catatonic. He doesn't love Julia anymore. We see them meet each other again, and they both admit that they threw each other under the bus. But is that to say that the book leaves us with no hope at all? Well, the answer to that is it depends how you read it or which ending you choose. So to understand the end, we need to read the last 3 paragraphs of the book, and we can see maybe here the 3 different endings, or at least 2 of them. So I'm starting under the table Winston's feet, but before we get there, just a reminder, Winston is watching the news and he sees the final battle. It's being live broadcast between Eurasia and Oceania. And this is the battle to end the war. It could really go either way. Winston's not sure who's going to win, much like maybe it's somewhat meta, right? Maybe we're unsure if Winston's actually going to win, if he's actually going to prevail at the end of this book, or if he loses. And who wins? Oceania wins in the war against Winston and against Eurasia. And so victory, victory, victory. Under the table, Winston's feet made convulsive movements. He had not stirred from his seat, but in his mind he was running, swiftly running. Let's pause. So he's at the table, and under his table his feet are going like that. Keep that in mind, because later on we're going to ask what table or what chair is he actually sitting at. Because he seems to be imagining himself running with the crowd when he's sitting at the bar, right? He was with the crowds outside cheering himself deaf. He looked up again at the portrait of Big Brother, the colossus that bestrode the world. Let's skip ahead a little bit, still in that same paragraph at the very end. It was much more than the Eurasian army that had perished. More, what could be more? Maybe Winston's mind had also perished, right? Much had changed in him since the first day in the ministry of love. But the final, indispensable, healing change had never happened until this moment. This was the final healing change. Why? Well, he's finally actually rooting for Big Brother. He actually cares. But not only that, he believes Big Brother can win this war. He believes that the war will end. And we know from the Emmanuel Goldstein book, we know from the military-industrial complex that wars are there to benefit the upper class. The upper class in both countries, or multiple countries that are in wars, end up benefiting because it fuels the economy at the expense of life of others. And this is what Orwell believes. So we have to keep that in mind, right? So now that he's rooting for Oceania, maybe he's turned. Okay? Let's continue. Next paragraph. The voice from the telescreen was still pouring forth its tale of prisoners and booty and slaughter, but the shouting outside had died down a little. The waiters were turning back to their work. One of them approached with the gin bottle. Winston, sitting in a blissful dream, paid no attention that his glass was filled up. He was not running or cheering any longer. So what is he actually doing? He's back in the ministry of love, with everything forgiven, his soul wet as snow. He was in the public dock, confessing everything, implicating everybody. He was walking down the white-tiled corridor with the feeling of walking in sunlight and an armed guard at his back. The long hoped-for bullet was entering his brain. Okay, let's pause there. That might seem a little bit confusing. There's 2 interpretations of this scene. The first one is he was actually at the bar, but he's having a flashback at this moment of Oceania winning. And this flashback, when he's watching the news, so that's the reality. He's having a memory of his final moments of the ministry of love. Okay, that's one. The second one is he's never been at the cafe, and he imagined that whole thing. He's been at the ministry of love the whole time. He's never left. Keep that in mind, and we'll go more in depth into that later. Last paragraph. He gazed up at the enormous face. 40 years it had taken him to learn what kind of smile was hidden beneath the dark mustache. O cruel, needless misunderstanding. O stubborn, self-willed exile from the loving breast. 2 gin-scented tears trickled down the sides of his nose. But it was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother. So the book ends either way, right? Pretty dark, right? And these two endings. Winston has lost who he is. He no longer rebels. That was his defining characteristic, was him rebelling against Big Brother, and he's rooting for him now, right? So it's a dark ending. How are there two endings here? So I mentioned the two separate realities, and I'll talk about what they represent. So the first one is an emotional death of Winston. All right. So he is rooting for Big Brother, and it's in that instant that he's rooting for Big Brother while he's actually at the cafe that he has his emotional death. He no longer is who he was. He becomes a cog in the machine of Big Brother. He is following Big Brother full-heartedly. He's like their biggest supporter now. So there's that emotional death. And that's if we think that Winston was just imagining for an instant him coming back to the Ministry of Love, that there was just a flash, a really vivid memory. The other one is if you flip the realities. And the second one is that he physically died. And that's not to say that he doesn't have the emotional death either, but on top of it, his life is physically taken away from him. This is Winston never left the cafe. He never sees Julia again. He's there being tortured for the rest of his life. And finally, he imagines Oceania winning. And when he imagines Oceania winning, that's when a guard walks up behind him and shoots him in the back of the head. So the long hoped-for bullet was entering his brain. That can be a metaphorical bullet, if you want to do option number one, that it's the emotional death of Winston. Or it can be an actual bullet if you choose to believe that he physically died. Either way, though, it's dark. And you have to ask yourself, why would you end a book that's supposed to teach us something, right? 1984 is trying to teach us, it's trying to wake us up. It ends in such a bleak way. There seems to be no hope, right? Why do you think Orwell would choose to end the book without hope? You might want to pause. I think I have a question on this. I'll see later. Answer that question and then come back to the rest of the video. Okay, if you've done that, you're back to the video. The third ending is kind of my answer to that. So I want you to ask yourself, why would you end a book in such a dark way? That's what most people think 1984 ends with, but I think it actually has a fairly hopeful ending. And that can be found in the very next page, which is the appendix. And so let's go there. So there's a third ending. Let's read the first sentence even of page 246, the principles of Newspeak. It's an appendix. We get this on page 3. I think page 7, sorry. It's the third page of the book, but page 7 in our edition. It gives us the, there's an asterisk to the bottom of page 7 and says, you can go to the appendix and learn more about Newspeak. Some of you may have done it. I am fairly certain that 95% of you did not read the appendix. So maybe you're reading it now, or maybe you're like, the book ended. It says the end. I'm going to put it down. But if you choose to educate yourself, if you choose to go further, you'll see that 1984 has actually a positive ending. All right, let's read it. Newspeak was the official language of Oceania and had been devised to meet the ideological needs of INGSOC, or English socialism. Before I go into the ending that was just revealed there, if you didn't see it, I do recommend reading the principles of Newspeak. We know Newspeak is the most powerful weapon of Oceania, of Big Brother. And so this talks about how Newspeak was developed. You get some new Newspeak terms. I would say the three most interesting parts of the book for me are the Emmanuel Goldstein chapters, the conversations with O'Brien when Winston's being tortured. We get some deep insight into how the structures of Big Brother, and then this appendix. Those are the three most interesting to me. So did you guys figure out the ending? What tense is this first sentence is? Newspeak was the official language of Oceania and had been devised to meet the ideological needs of INGSOC. It's in the past tense. Someone is writing about Big Brother as if it was in the past, and if Newspeak was in the past. It no longer exists from the perspective of this appendix. And so from that small clue, we can recognize maybe that someone is writing about this as if it no longer exists, and that there was maybe a revolution against Big Brother and systems had changed. And so, what could that change be? You should go back to chapter 7. The very opening lines of chapter 7 is, "If there is hope, it lies with the proles." That quote is very key. Proles is short for proletarian. It's a newspeak term for proletarian. That means the working class. Those are the people that actually do the work. They're not telling people to do the work. That's where the power is. It's 85% of the population. If they realize that they have power, then they can overtake it. Chapter 7, the beginning of it, kind of outlines how the proletariat, the proles, can overtake Big Brother and how that hope exists. But that's how the book really ends, right? It ends with a revolution of the workers, superseding, overcoming Big Brother. So, does this book have a dark ending? Yes and no. It has 3 endings. I hope that clarified some things. I hope you guys enjoyed the book, and that's it.